My sister-in-law has never liked me. Why? Because I have dark complexion and she doesn't like that apparently. Her family comes from a long line of people who don't like that. But let me explain something very important to the story. She's getting married, and she had to come to me because I knew a photographer who was way cheap and she had to use him because she could not afford a very luxurious one. However, my photographer is pro-level. So, I get those two together. But get this, after the wedding, when they're talking back and forth about the photographs, she must have forgot that I was still in the text thread. And you know what she says? Oh, by the way, can you remove OP from the pictures because her complexion is ruining the pictures? Yeah, so I absolutely flip out. I take all those text messages and I put them on social media to expose her for who she is. And guess what happened to her?
I'm Middle Eastern, dark-skinned woman with raven black hair. My parents have migrated to America in their 30s and had me. I've grown up amongst my American friends and family and never gave a second thought about my lineage up until now. There's a bit of a backstory about my boyfriend Ben and his sister Janet. I met Ben at a restaurant. He had been the worker as a server. I frequented that restaurant as I was in love with their eggs and French toast. I would often work till late evenings and lose my time sipping coffee and staring at my laptop screen. One day, however, something, or rather someone, caught my attention. I noticed a server fumble and drop the food tray he was carrying, the drink spilling on a few of the customers seated. One of the customers' kids had decided it was a nice idea to run around the waiters and the tables annoying everyone in the restaurant. She had dashed into the server and the result was a chaotic mess. With the kid's mother blaming the server for not watching out. No one else stood up for the poor server, even though the kid had annoyed them too. I witnessed the moment for a while and the server looked like he was about to cry. That's when I stepped in and told them that, I told the mom off for not taking proper care of her kid, and she glanced at me angry before leaving the restaurant with her kid. Good riddance. The server walked up to me and thanked me for taking his side. I introduced myself, and he told me his name was Ben, and told me how this was his uncle's restaurant and he had just joined here a few days ago. He also offered me anything I wanted from the menu and told me it would be on the house. I thanked him and made a small conversation. Not long before, I see him talking to a blonde-haired American woman who resembled him. He pointed me out to her and I waved back. She walked over to me and thanked me for standing up for her brother, and she introduced herself as Janet and asked me questions about where I'm from, as I certainly don't look American. I was weirded out by her comment on my ethnicity, as I never have been called out for, quote, not looking American. I made a note to stay away from Janet, but Ben had seemed like such a nice person. I wondered how two siblings could have been raised to have such conflicting ideals. A few hellos and smiles led me to Ben asking me out. I was happy and politely accepted the date. I knew Ben did not make much at his post as a server who had just started out at his uncle's. That's why I was shocked when I came to a restaurant that was way above his pay rate. He told me he had saved up just so he could give me a nice experience, and that in itself made me fall for him. There we were, fine wine and dining with white tablecloths, and soon it was us in pajamas, waking up at each other's breakfast in bed. I liked having been over at mine more than I liked being at his. Well, there were two major reasons. His sister Janet and his mother Jenna. It was evident from the start that Jenna and Janet did not like me. They were subtle hints of racism in their behavior, but I let it go because maybe it was a cultural difference, although, mind you, I did grow up in America and had American traditions. Janet had met her boyfriend, Harry, on a dating app, and they had been on a date or two when Janet started inviting me and Ben on double dates with her and Harry. There was one such incident that made me feel as if she does so just to show me how, quote, proper Americans act. She had invited me and Ben into another one of her endless double dates, and Ben and I arrived, and the first words to come out of Janet were not a greeting or a hello, but rather, "You're underdressed." They appeared to be more so directed at, and unbeknownst to us, Janet had reserved a restaurant with posh dining experience. Me and my sundress and braided hair with what was a casual look that I had put on, as I assumed that we were going on a casual date, did look a bit underdressed. I felt my cheeks turn red as the embarrassment crept in. Ben, however, had decided to wear a blazer, so he did not appear underdressed at all. During the duration of the whole date, I shifted in my seat as I felt uncomfortable. I was quick and excused myself from the situation and vowed never again would I attend one of her invitations without prior and adequate information about it. Ben had followed me long after, berating me for embarrassing him by just leaving the restaurant like that. But I had, however, ignored his words as I felt I was in my right to do what I did and remove myself from places I did not feel wanted. Janet had called me not long after to yell at me and told me about how I was breaking American etiquette and how I should learn to be more accommodating with situations. Ben's mother, Jenna, too, would give subtle hints of her hatred towards dark-skinned people. I would not be invited to family get-togethers or even Christmas, whereas Harry had gotten to attend them all. When I asked Ben the reason why Jenna did not want me to be introduced to the whole family, he would come up with another excuse after another, until finally one day he admitted, although accidentally, that what Jenna was doing was racism, and she would rather watch herself become it and turn into a big issue. I confronted Ben about what I had heard, and that had caused a few bitter days of us not talking for like 2 to 4 days. Ben eventually had enough of the rift and silent fights between me and Jenna and Janet. As soon as Ben got promoted to assistant manager, he rented an apartment for the both of us. I was skeptical of it at first, as I did not know how the budget would pay out, but was happy to finally be rid of this mother and sister. They, however, had seized this opportunity to their use and had made Henry move in with them. I was livid, as this offer was not initially on the plate when Ben had still lived with them. Ben told me to let it go, as now we're in a good place without Jenna and Janet to disturb our mental peace. Well, it was midsummer of July. Barely a month, and perhaps 2 had passed when Jenna started sending out invitations to a wedding. Her wedding, with Harry. It came as a shock to all of us, as they had not been dating for long, for her to send out invitations, or for him to propose. However, I was happy for Janet, and I was happy for Ben as well. We RSVP'd yes to the invitation, and we would both be attending. Here's a bit of backstory about my friend Xavier. Xavier and I met in college. He was the college photographer, and I was a shy geek who did not want her pictures taken. More so, I was insecure about my looks and dark skin. However, it was mandatory to have one's picture taken professionally for our resume applications. That's where students who were skilled with cameras and photography would come in. It would benefit them, so they would earn a few dollars on the side. And Xavier was not the only photographer in college, you know. There was another guy who rather made me uncomfortable and even more insecure about my looks than I already was. He had once told me to put some of effort into applying makeup rather than be on the computer all day. I was agitated and ran out of the room, past Xavier in tears, and Xavier had noticed the altercations between me and the photographer. He came to check in on me and console me. Xavier promised to take amazing pictures of me, and he even told me he would charge me less than what the other photographer had charged me. He said that's so because he's just starting out and because most of his clientele were students. They would be able to afford it and have their picture taken. During the photography session, Xavier guided me on the posture, etc. When the pictures came out, they were by the very best of me. I started boasting about Xavier's photography skills and showed everyone the pictures that he's taken. Soon enough, Xavier's business was booming, and the other photographers had to stop his as people started to recognize him for his arrogance. Xavier had become a good friend of mine, and we would hang out often and discuss stuff about college or other friends. It had been years since I and Xavier's existence, up until recently when I was reminded of it. The wedding preparations for Janet and Harry's, wedding were a buzz. Everyone would gather at Jenna's house and sit on a group discussing all the wedding planning. I, however, made a point to avoid it unless Ben asked me to, as I wanted a peaceful environment free of conflict, and I did not despise Janet or Jenna. They had just made me uncomfortable in a few situations, and I wanted to make sure I won't end up in those situations again. In fact, I sometimes looked up to Janet for her beauty and success. The news came to me that Janet had been looking for a photographer, one that did not bankrupt her. It flashed to me about Xavier, and I decided to put in a word of mouth to Janet about him. I first contacted Xavier, who was happy to do a wedding, as he had recently started as a bridal photographer and business was not very big yet. He thanked me for bringing his business back to life. Upon hearing of Xavier, Janet had been so excited, and so I created a group chat with her, myself and Xavier in it. We would talk a little on the group chat, and later Xavier and Janet met up together and from then on discussed on personal messages and any details regarding the wedding. I thought that was the end of it, but apparently not. The wedding, to my surprise, had been absolutely amazing, and everything had gone smoothly as we all had planned, and there had been no drama of any sort. The wedding was child-free, as none of the guests who were invited had any kids anyways, except for like a handful who had left their kids with a nanny so they could enjoy their personal time at the wedding. Harry and Janet seemed happy as I admired them talking to everyone, smiling, taking pictures, dancing. I wished to one day have the same life as Ben. Xavier, too, had a great time at the wedding as he danced along and ate. The next day, Janet and Harry went off on their honeymoon, far away to a tropical place with beaches and palm trees, and I was happy for Janet. In the next day or two, my phone rings, and I checked to see the new messages on the group I had created for Xavier and Janet, and I wondered what it could be, as anything related to Xavier's photography or wedding. She would text him personally. I thought it might have been a mistake. The messages were of her thanking Xavier, along with the favor she had to ask him regarding changing the symmetry of the flowers in the picture. There was also an unusual request that made me stop in my tracks. She asked if he could take me off the photos because I ruined the color palette. Not all the pictures, just the ones that Janet was in. I texted back on whether or not she was kidding, and she did not reply. I was fuming, and so I took screenshots of her messages and posted it to my story, literally exposing her racism to all our family and friends along with some internet strangers. I tagged her in it too. She called my boyfriend crying her eyes out, calling me an a-hole for embarrassing her and ruining her honeymoon. Ben had thought it was a low blow, and I was blinded with rage when I did it, but even now I'm calm. I still don't feel that I was an a-hole. But people have been contacting her, apparently asking if she really wrote that stuff. She's so beautiful and successful, so I don't want to blame it on jealousy or scared of being outshined. So guys, I ask you this. Am I the a-hole for ruining my sister-in-law's honeymoon by exposing her racism online? What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you guys are having an amazing day. So today's story is wild. Can you imagine the audacity of OP? I mean, yeah, she probably didn't mean to send it to the group text, but who cares? That was absurd. We do have some updates to get into, and if you think it was heated, you've seen nothing yet. If you're new to the channel, just do me a favor, Hit that subscribe button because it really helps support me, and that way you never miss a video. Here's your first update. My sister-in-law, Janet, is still on vacation, so I've not talked to her yet, but she has been bombarding my boyfriend, her brother, Ben, demanding that I make a new Instagram story with my apology to her. What an absurdity, I thought. More people had started getting involved now, including my boyfriend's mother, Jenna. Jenna had shown up at our apartment saying that I had stepped out of line by doing what I did and exposing her daughter online, in turning ruining her honeymoon, which was supposed to be a happy time for her and Harry. I called Harry, as Janet had not picked up my phone calls. He sounded sheepish as I apologized for disturbing them, and I asked if I could have a word with Janet, to which he said that she does not want to speak to me. I thought it suspicious and weird, as she would call and complain to everyone, but not talk to me and sort it out. I just wanted to understand why she would send that text, even though I've been nice to her by getting her in touch with Xavier. I got contacted by a few of Janet's friends, particularly Carol and Alice. They had messaged me, asking if I could have a talk with them, as there were certain things I needed to know about her. I agreed to meet up with them, so some of Janet's other friends told me stories about what she's been talking about, and she has been talking about me behind my back. Yeah, now I do indeed feel like she got what she deserved. The number of her friends that weren't surprised at all by her text made it clear to me that I was not wrong. I met up with Alice and Carol at a cafe and made sure Ben was not aware of our meeting, as he was in support of his sister and had decided I was going too far with exposing her on social media. Alice and Carol were Janet's childhood friends who had eventually stopped talking to her over time, but had maintained a connection with her for namesake. Alice looked at me as I walked in, an innocent smile on her face, and she seemed almost apologetic and felt sympathy toward me. No one deserved to be targeted for their skin color, something which one has no control over. Carol told me about Janet's dad, a story I had never heard from Ben or his family, as they refused to talk about what happened to him. Well, Alice told me how Ben's dad was a racist. He despised everyone of color. He had taught Ben and Janet to grow up in his footsteps, but Ben had not taken to him very easily, whereas he had imprinted on Janet a little. She was not a full-blown racist, but rather a silent one. Their dad had died when Janet was 10 due to cancer, which had left a traumatic experience on her. She had then tried to be a carbon copy of her dad, doing the same thing that her dad had done. Carol explained to me how Janet really did mean no harm, but she had been raised to think that she did was right. I sympathize with that, but right now, Janet was a grown woman, and it's the 21st century, and Janet should know what's right and change from her aged ideas. Carol also told me why Janet had been scared of the Instagram story, and why it had bothered her so. Janet works for international clients, and she's self-employed with foreign customers, and so that's why she had taken it so hard. She was scared it would affect her career. This had given me an idea of my own. I knew how to deal with the situation now, and I don't feel like I need to save her career should something bad happen to it. I thanked Carol and Alice for passing on the information to me and asked them to keep in touch with me. Carol and Alice apologized on behalf of their friend. We parted ways, and I sent Xavier a text asking him to meet up with me. Xavier arrived in a moment, and I collected myself so as not to lose my anger in front of my friend. Xavier looked apologetic and said if it would hurt me, he would drop Janet as a client. Well, I told him I would manage it, and he should do what Janet had asked of him, as I did not want to hurt his business. I bid Xavier goodbye and set on my path to face Ben and Jenna, and in the upcoming days, face Janet and confront her about it. Update number 2. The day I had been dreading. The day of Janet's homecoming and, well, from her honeymoon. It had been 2 or so weeks since the wedding, and I still had the story up and would not remove it until I talked to Janet about it. It had been a few days since Ben had uttered a word to me. He said he would not do so until I take the story down. Which I have not. Ben had been staying over at his mother's, Jenna's, so I was left alone to my thoughts about how to proceed with the issues. I sat down and waited for Ben to show up with Janet. The doorbell rang and I jumped up to get it. To my surprise, it was Harry at the door. I asked him, "Where's Janet?" And he told me he needs to talk to me. I sensed an urgency in his words and let him in as I put on a kettle of tea for all of us. Harry walked up to me and said that Janet and Ben knew that Carol and Alice had come clean to me about their dad and everything about Janet. I could sense a big fight that was about to happen. Harry was my silent companion, even though we both knew he would have to take his wife's side when she arrived. Well, Ben arrived first, with Janet in tow, and Ben looked as mad at me as Janet did. When she looked towards her brother, she shed a silent fake tear as if to show that she was the victim between the both of us. We all sat down as Harry poured some tea into our cups. Janet went first, speaking out against me, saying that she was allowed to do whatever she wanted with her wedding pictures, and if she wanted to take me out of them, she could, and she was the one who had paid the photographer. I sat in silence, listening to more retaliation from her, and Harry looked like a lamb caught in between 2 lions. He had no role to play in this fight between me and my sister-in-law, but he would need to take his wife's side. He nodded his head to agree with her, and when I spoke, my voice was laced with anger and straight-up annoyance. I told Janet that I would take the story down, only under one condition: that she must apologize for being racist towards me, and I further added that if she would ever put down another person due to their skin color, I would just share a text message and screenshots that contained her racist text again, with all her foreign clients this time. Janet's mouth dropped open in shock and she shut it. She realized that her career was at stake and that I was not going to step down until I got a little bit of justice. My boyfriend Ben, who had been silent all this time, stood up and spoke in my favor. He told his sister that she was indeed wrong in racially profiling me, and if she did not want me in her pictures, she could have just not invited me to it. Harry, too, supported Ben's statements, and Janet realized she was outnumbered. She apologized for doing what she did, and I took down the story. However, I kept the screenshots as leverage. This would teach her to change her mindset, and I apologized to Ben, but he said that he did not want to interfere in this rift between me and my sister-in-law, as long as no one got hurt terribly. Harry and Janet then left to go back to Jenna's, and Harry gave me a small smile as he left, as is to cheer me on for standing up to myself. My photographer friend did what he was told. That's the only right way in being professional and not confusing work with his own values. He asked me if I wanted him to say something, and I said no. I also asked him not to tell me that they're texting, since she's his client, so he should not break confidentiality. He's just starting his career and he'll meet worse brides. She was at least nice to him throughout their interaction, and I hoped things would clear up between me and my sister-in-law, and we would hopefully have a good relationship in the future, as she was my boyfriend's sister, and we both did indeed love her.
So that story was pretty crazy. Let me know your thoughts about it, but I do want to discuss a couple comments that got a lot of controversy. They were mainly saying, yeah, I don't really agree with what OP's sister-in-law did. However, she paid for the photograph, so she can say whatever she wants about it. And I think it was too far that OP exposed her. By the way, that is not the popular opinion. Many people were totally against that, but I would say it was like 70% were against that, and 30% agreed that OP went about this the wrong way. So I want to hear from you guys. Where exactly do you sit on this? And if you want to explain it, let's drop it down below in the comment section. Thank you for joining me today. My name's Mr. Reddito. If you guys want daily videos, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.